Welcome to MapCrow, the RPG art show. My name is Kyle, and today I have an inkling we're talking about inking. This show is brought to you by the generous contributions of the lovely backers of the MapCrow Patreon. If you would like to show your support and receive a monthly asset packs of digital terrain and minis for your virtual tabletop gaming, head over to patreon.com/mapcrow and pledge today. In fact, what you see before you is me inking the digital terrain and minis from this very month's MapCrow Patreon asset pack. One of the challenging parts of being an illustrator, or really any kind of artist, is that you have to approach everything you draw in a slightly different way, paying attention to different details and emphases depending on what kind of surfaces you're trying to convey. Stone needs to look different than wood, needs to look different than grass, needs to look different than water, and so on and so on and so on. But all you're really doing in the inking stage is putting down black lines. So how are you supposed to really differentiate all of these different materials and surfaces with the exact same tool? As an illustrator, I am self-taught. I learned by trying out lots of different things and looking very closely at the cartoonists that inspired me and trying to figure out what they were doing that I wasn't. But one of the best things that I ran into was a book called The DC Comics Guide to Inking Comics by Klaus Janson, who is one of the finest inkers in the industry. And while you're out looking for books, go ahead and pick yourself up some inking by Carl Story. He is probably most famous for inking the penciler Christopher Sprouse in the book Tom Strong. So that's worth checking out. And then also really look closely at how Joe Sinnott is inking Jack Kirby and how Mike Mignola is inking himself. And you will learn more from looking at those than you will from this video. But let's start by talking about these bricks that I am inking right here. It's always important while inking to ink from foreground to background, the things that are closest to the camera and moving back further in the composition. So in this case, starting with that top rightmost corner, for that brick, and then inking the things behind that, and then the things that are lower than that, and so on and so forth. And this will allow you to make sure that you're not accidentally drawing things overlapping in ways that look unnatural. As artists, it is so easy to just start drawing the thing that you think is the most interesting or the most rewarding. But when it comes to inking with permanent lines that are difficult to erase, it becomes more important to be deliberate about the order in which you are drawing things. Also, to invest each of these bricks with some volume, I am going over the perimeter with a solid line that goes around the whole outside. And oftentimes I'm going over this a couple of times to make sure that the line weight is separating these bricks from each other. And then I am going over the interior lines, kind of the corners that are facing you, with this ragged hatchwork line. And that is to imply surface quality and also to keep all of these solid lines from looking like line spaghetti. It helps you differentiate not only surfaces and materials, but also what shapes are important to look at to really see what's going on with this shape. As you may expect, drawing stones is basically the same as drawing stone work, except you are working with sort of lumpier shapes and not quite as rectangular. But it is still very important to break up your larger stone shapes with little interior shapes. And by drawing these tiny little wavy lines kind of next to each other, it sort of implies a less hard edge. And it also gives the eye somewhere to go, somewhere to break down this larger shape into kind of more meaningful textures. The act of cartooning is to exaggerate the textures and features that are most important and iconic about their real-world antecedents, so it becomes really important to look at rocks very closely, and while they might seem very smooth, to exaggerate those folds and creaks and crevices and all this kind of stuff to bring out the rockiness of the rock. I know of no better way to put it. For these particular standing stones, I am including these petroglyphs, these carved images on the surface of the stones, and to do that, I'm using really imprecise, wavy, dotted lines to show that the depth of the carved images are not so deep as some of the other cracks and crevices that I've already drawn on the rock. For years, I have done all of my inking with a 0.05 black micron, and I like it because it's easy to adjust line weight for the important exterior lines to make sure that my shapes are separating and reading properly. You can get much tinier with your line work, but if it gets much smaller than what I'm working at, it doesn't show up on digital screens nearly as well. And if it doesn't look good on a screen, it's difficult to market the work. It's important to remember that style is a product of design constraints. In a previous video, I've already demonstrated how to draw dungeon floors with these kind of big stone tiles, but there's a lot in that video that, while true, it's not necessarily what you should do on every single floor tile. And it's the same way here. You want to leave plenty of tiles that aren't cracked and aren't shaded. It gives the eye somewhere to rest, and it allows those details to maintain their impact and emphasis. Indeed, if I was working on a larger dungeon floor tile than the one you see on the screen right now, I would probably go even less detailed than what you're seeing here. I'm looking forward to next month when I'm going to be making a bunch of modular terrains specifically for your classic dungeon. So look for a video following up on some of these dungeon floor ideas in about a month or so. But for now, let's look at what I am doing on the screen. You can see that this starts very, very similar to how I am drawing bricks, but you can also see how I am detailing and hatching on the top of these to go with the grain of the grid underneath it. It is important that when you are adding details to objects, they are reinforcing contour, or in this case, a sense of flatness and walkability. It's important to remember that these maps are game pieces and they need to be legible so that players and GMs can read the space and use them to make interesting decisions within the game world. As I am drawing this wooden platform, I am deliberately making planks look crusty and in poor maintenance because that helps it read more as wood. It might tick off some carpenters out there to see something that is so ramshackle and poorly crafted, but the fact is that all of the extra splinters, overlapping boards, and nails that are sticking out help this read as a completely different material than the other floor tiles that I'm working on in this set. This might sound weird to say, but if you're drawing a wooden floor and it's well crafted and all the planks are fitting flush together and all the nails are exactly where they belong, it's just going to look like a bunch of lines. And of course it is a bunch of lines, but that's the last thing you want people to be thinking about. You want them to be recognizing what they are seeing, and otherwise the spell is broken. And when people have to closely scrutinize all of these perfectly ruled lines to determine what kind of material it is, you've really missed out on something. And this is one of the reasons I like drawing fantasy settings more, is because things can be more characterful, and in this kind of polished, clean sci-fi setting, like something like Star Trek Next Generation, it just doesn't have the kind of character to keep my interest as an artist, nor does it provide sensuality. It's just a bunch of plastic and metal that very politely stays where it's supposed to. Now, trees provide an interesting challenge for isometric maps as well as top-down maps because they are thin at the trunk and then the leaves are going to cover up a bunch of stuff. So you won't really be able to show things that are underneath or behind all of this coverage of leaves. So one of the ways that I kind of get around this is I like to draw fallen trees and logs kind of littering the ground, because then you get all of those, beautiful organic tree shapes and avoid blocking this beautiful map, gameable space that you're designing. As I am hatching along with the contour to show kind of this decomposing bark texture, I'm being very deliberate in leaving the top of this fallen tree unhatched. And this will allow there to be a place for the eye to rest, and it will also allow you to keep that emphasis and impact of the hatchwork that's on the bottom shadowy side of the tree. The ever-present challenge of the cartoonist is to decide what to show and what not to show, where to describe and where to abbreviate and where to abstract. And so just make sure you're leaving plenty of open space on certain surfaces so that all of your details don't just become a confusing tangle of details, that it still reads as the thing that you're trying to draw. Man, I have a lot more footage that I shot in this recording session, but this video is kind of getting a little long in the tooth as it is. And also, I want you to remember that I'm not trying to show you how you should draw these things. I'm trying to reveal to you the principles that I am using to make my decisions so that you can make different decisions that reflect your values and your design goals. So by all means, use this video however you will, but I'm not going to be able to do a video on how to draw every possible thing that could come up. So it is up to you to take the information that I'm talking about and engage with the resources that I've put out so that you can kind of find your own way in this wonderful artistic journey that perhaps you've decided to start. In any case, that will do it for this episode. Gosh, there's just so many videos I want to make. I was kind of buried in a bunch of deadlines recently, but I finally get my head above the water, and I am just so excited to talk about how to draw figures in isometric perspective and do some more actual plays using my terrain pieces. So look forward to that in the coming weeks, and until next time, my friends, farewell.